everyone, and welcome to the Koala Club podcast, a podcast made by and for international students in Australia. I am Kevin.
And I am Trang, and we talk about everything education, work, and lifestyle for overseas students in Australia.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Koala Club podcast. Today is quite a special episode because this is our live episode. This is probably the first time in the last year or 6 or 7 months at least that we record live in person. So I'm in the same room with Trang here. How are you, Trang?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to be recording in person again after, I think it's definitely since, this time last year. During the past year, we've been recording via Zoom. So it's good to see you in person and then to record this episode face to face.
It's great that now COVID is getting less and less restricted. So we have this chance to do this record live. Okay, so it's June here in Australia. That means it's tax time. And I remember first year in Australia, I had no clue about the income tax system, what is required of me, what are tax file number, and what is a tax return. And I wish that if I had the background knowledge back then, I would have avoided some mistake that I made. Luckily for us, today we have our Trang is a specialist here about everything tax. So she will walk us through this tax time, hey?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a tax specialist. I did work in tax for maybe over 4 years. So I do know a little bit about tax, but you can never be a tax specialist because there is so much to uncover, and I don't currently work in tax. So this episode, we really do want to give you some basic info on the whole tax system here in Australia and how that should impact you and how to do your tax return and stuff like that. Because we wish someone would have taught us this when we first came to Australia. But yeah, just a disclaimer that I'm not providing any tax advice. This is just merely me providing actual facts on tax that would be useful for you international students. And I'm just uncovering really a basic scenario. I'm not covering more complicated or advanced tax scenarios, which would be quite uncommon for international students anyways, shares, investments, or business income. And yeah, this is not comprehensive of everything you need to know.
Yes.
The Australian tax system can't be covered in one podcast episode. You'll probably need a whole podcast to dedicate it to the Australian tax system.
Yeah, so this is a basic guide for you to have a basic understanding of the tax. So let's start. What is a tax file number, Trang?
Yeah, so a tax file number, as the name suggests, it's a number that's linked to your identity. And it's a unique number for tax and superannuation purposes. So it stays with you forever, and it's issued by the Australian Taxation Office. So you need this tax file number to give to your employer when you start a new job, because they report your wages and the tax amount, so what they pay you, to the Australian Taxation Office. And they also pay superannuation for you to a superannuation fund that's linked to your tax file number. And then at the end of the financial year, you use your tax file number to lodge your yearly tax return to the ATO. So how to apply? So I think we get a lot of questions from international students about how to actually apply. Very simply, you apply online through the ATO website. We will link the ATO website for you in the show notes. So that's probably the quickest way to apply. You can apply in person at the post office at Australia Post. You will need your identification documents. I'm not sure now if you still have to call to verify your identity, because I remember when I first came to Australia and I applied, I needed to call the Australian... I can't remember, it was the Australian Taxation Office, because I have a foreign passport, so they needed to verify my identity at the very beginning. I'm not sure if you recall anything about that, Kevin.
Yeah, that was such a long time ago. I don't even remember, but there was some sort of identity check.
Yeah, because when you first come to Australia, I think the only ID you have is your passport.
The passport.
Yeah, so just be wary of that. But they will give you instructions after you apply. They will give you what the next steps should be. Yeah, and please note that this is free, so you shouldn't have to pay anything for a tax file number, because there's a lot of scam websites online that tell you that you can apply for TFN through them, and then they make you pay for it. So just be careful of those scam websites. So only apply through the ATO website.
And is it safe to say you should never give away your tax file number to anyone and only keep it to yourself?
Yeah, that's partly true. Like, you don't give out your tax file number to anyone that asks. So really the only people that would require your tax file number would be your employer, because they need to report that to the ATO, and the bank and the superannuation fund. So yeah, don't give it out to your friend if they ask, because I think Kevin had an experience with that, as previously mentioned in our part-time jobs episode. Kevin, did you want to elaborate quickly?
Yes, as I mentioned before, I mistakenly gave away my tax file number to a friend of mine. And yeah, it wasn't a good practice. And at the time, I didn't know that I was not supposed to give my tax file number to anyone. Doesn't matter what the reason is, only give it to your employer who pays your super. So yeah, don't make the mistake as I did, and try to, it's one of your most privacy information. So try to keep it to yourself and not give it to anyone to avoid any scam or any, a mistake happen in the future.
Yeah, and even if you give out your tax file number to your employer, just be careful, because I did have an experience where I was working a cash in hand job where I was getting paid cash, and they asked me for my tax file number, and I gave that to them, but they used that to inflate the wages number that they report. So that's dodgy practice. That's illegal. So yeah, just be careful even with your employer if you're working a cash job, to make sure that the amount they report is correct.
So yeah, by doing that, that's work out better for them. But for you, you may have to pay more tax than you should have. And if it over the tax-free threshold, then you may have to pay more tax back to the ATO. So if you work in a cash in hand job, maybe you will need, and the employer asks you for your tax file number, maybe you will need to ask them the proof that how much, like they should have some kind of invoice or statement to show you that how much they paying in your super, right? And also how much they are, taking away from your wages for tax. So that way you can check accurately.
Yeah, for sure. And you can even log into your superannuation fund to check that they're actually paying your super.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next thing we want to talk about is about income tax return preparations. I know that about June, July, the extent I know is I prepare all the invoices, all the tax deductible work expenses, and then I hand it out to my accountant. That's probably the extent I know too. So Chang, can you walk me through more details about that process?
Yeah, sure. So in Australia, the tax year starts from 1st of July and ends on the 30th of June the following year. So throughout the year, when you work for an employer, they will pay you wages, and their payroll would calculate how much tax to withhold from your gross wages. And there's actually a calculator, a very handy tool on the ATO website that you can put in your wages amount to calculate how much tax you would be withheld from your wage. So a very simple example, like say you make $500 a week, for example, the employer's payroll will calculate, and they have a payroll system, but it will essentially use the same calculator as the ATO. They'll calculate that, okay, your tax withheld amount will be $100, so your net pay is $400, so that's what goes into your bank account. Now, at the end of the tax year, so traditionally employers would give you a copy of your payment summary. Now they report it to the ATO electronically every pay run, so it should appear in your MyGov account, and this is now called like an income statement. So when you lodge the tax return, that should pop up automatically for you. I think now some employers would still give out payment summaries, I think, but just double check with your employer to be sure. And a little bit about MyGov. So this is a government portal that links all the government services to your identity. So the first time you set this up, you would need to link your ATO portal to your MyGov account. And this is where you will lodge your tax return. So you'll lodge this online. So the payment summary or the income statement on MyGov from your employer, that would give you the total amount that for the year. So total gross wages, for example, 10,000, tax withheld 2,000. So that's what you use to lodge your tax return. Yeah, after 30 June, you can lodge your tax return through MyGov. And I think the deadline's about 31st of October. So you've got 3 months to lodge it. But if you do go through a tax agent, so that's someone who can lodge your tax return for you, they're certified and all that. You do have an extended deadline till May the following year. But I think with international students, your tax affairs are simple enough for you to lodge yourself, so you don't have to pay a tax agent to do it for you.
And I experienced this before, but when I first came to Australia, like I said, I didn't know anything about tax. So I actually, first time when I lodged my tax return, I actually had like a couple of years when I didn't lodge my tax return. And in that case, I'm pretty sure you can backtrack and lodge your tax return from previous years as well, right?
Yeah, you can. So even though you've probably missed the deadline, sometimes they go easy on you and you can still lodge it. But if you can't, you can explain to them your circumstances and they would understand, because you're international students. Like they do understand that you're not fully across the tax system. But it's good when you lodge several years in a row, you get a big refund amount come in or at once.
Yes, all depends on, or you have to pay more taxes.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. Okay, so let's talk next about your tax return. So what exactly is it? And when you say return, right, you expect to receive back some sort of money because you pay tax and you can deduct. So let's talk about all that.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. It's quite a lengthy topic, but yeah. So the full income tax return is quite long, but there will be a lot of sections that are not applicable to you when you're an international student. So yeah, the purpose of the tax return really is where you report all your income and tax withheld during the tax year, and then the ATO will assess how much you will need to pay or how much tax refund you will get based on your total position. So a really basic scenario, an example, an international student has a part-time job. So for the whole year, their gross pay was $10,000. Tax withheld was $2,000. So when you log into your MyGov, hopefully this would show up automatically. Otherwise, you just need to input it in. Usually I would give the ATO a few days or a few weeks after 30 June so that they have the time to import all your data across. And that also depends on when your employer submits your data as well. So yeah, if it doesn't show up, just input it in manually based on what your employer gives you. And obviously check that the amounts are correct. And then like say if you put some money in the bank in a savings account, you get interest income of say $100 for the year. But because you give so with the bank, you do need to give your tax file number. But if you didn't, they have the obligation to withhold 47% of your interest income. So say in this case, if you forgot, they will withhold $47 from you.
Yeah, I remember that. That's very tricky. You need to give them the tax file number and tell them to apply to all your accounts, including say your everyday bank account and your saving account. And that actually applies the same to most of the investment platform as well. I think I wasn't investing when I was international students, but for those of you that are investing, say, in share or ETF, for example, you need to find out what registry take care of that investment and give them your tax file number. Like you can do an online form, fill in the online form. But if you don't, like Chang said, they're going to tax you the highest margin, which is 47%.
Yeah.
That's pretty large.
Yeah. And yeah, you do get that back eventually, depending on your overall position at year end. So how you are assessed is based on, what income tax rate your total income, your taxable income falls into. So there's a table on the ATO website, which we will link to. But once you see the table, it's quite clear the different rates of tax depending on your taxable income. You will see on the first line, it will probably say 0 to 18,200 and it will say zero tax. So that's called the tax-free threshold. So for 2022, the financial year, the tax-free threshold is 18,200. So what this means is that if your total gross income for the year is less than this amount, there is no tax payable for you. So in the above example, when we said you had 10 grand from wages and $100 from interest income, this is less than the 18,200. So you will pay no tax. So you'll get all the tax withheld during the year back. So in the previous example, we said tax withheld was $2,000 plus the $47 withholding from the bank. So you'll get $2,047 back in your tax refund, which is a nice bonus at year end.
Yep, that's a nice refund, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know I'll be stoked as an international student to get 2,000 back. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of saving.
Yeah, and I'm just plucking numbers straight from the thin air, just for the example. But obviously, it would depend on your situation and what your employer actually withheld during the year. Yeah, I'm not going to go through deductions in this episode, but just a very quick outline on deductions or expenses. So this is essentially expenses that you have incurred during the year, and that was related to earning your income.
Yep.
So for example, you bought some stationery or something, and you work in an admin job. And then you can claim like other things like donations from registered charities. But most international students will probably make less than 18,200 in the year anyway. So you would fall under the threshold.
Yep.
So there is really no point to claim the deductions because it doesn't really make a difference to your tax outcome. But if you were over, like if your taxable income was over 18,200, then yes, you would claim some deductions, but you just got to be careful what you can claim. So I'll include the link here so you can have a read through if this situation applies to you.
All the deductions has to be work related, right? So it has to be things you buy to serve your work.
Yeah, so it needs to be incurred to derive your assessable income. But then, as mentioned, there's other types of deductions that you can claim, like donations, which is not really related to earning your assessable income, but the tax law allows you to claim those things. But yeah, we'll include the link so you can have a look through and have a leisure read of all the types of deductions you can claim.
That's right. So like, for example, I'm a civil engineer. That means new boots every year for me, something like that.
That one is a grey area of protective clothing. I'm not going to give that advice
not
here.
Giving any advice. Yeah, no, it's just a fun example.
Yeah.
But we got the idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Medicare levy sections.
Yeah, so this one is it made me really confused at the beginning. So Medicare levy is what you pay to the government to cover the free healthcare that you get here in Australia. However, most international students aren't eligible for Medicare in Australia. So yeah, you would only pay that levy if you're not exempt. So most international students would be because they're not eligible for Medicare. But we'll include a link from servicesaustralia.gov.au and you can read further about whether you're exempt or not. Most cases you would be exempt. So hence you shouldn't expect to pay this levy. The ATO website does give quite handy instructions on how to do your tax return. So we'll include that link as well. It's quite detailed and it gives you each section of the tax return and you can read through for more guidance. And I actually wish I knew this at the beginning, but there's actually tax volunteers out there to help you prepare your tax return. I think you can actually apply to be a volunteer and then you can help people who need help with their tax return.
Yep.
So if it's your first year here, I would probably reach out to these tax volunteers and get them to help you complete your first tax return. So I'll include that link in the show notes as well. But did you know about this, Kevin?
No, not at all. Has that always been a thing or?
Yeah, I think it's always been a thing. I think there's a eligibility criteria where you have to earn, I think, less than $60-something thousand to be eligible for help from these volunteers. But that would be the case for most international students. So yeah, I wish I knew that at the beginning too.
That was so good. I didn't know about that at all. I was lucky to have my host family, my homestay, to help me during the first couple of years. But yeah, if I'd known that back then, it was very helpful.
Yeah.
So be sure to check it out, guys. It's like free help. how great Australia is. Okay, so now let's talk about things called tax file number declarations, because I know every time we start a new job here, one of the first things your employers does is give you a form to fill out. I think it's a yellowish form color from my memory, but
Orange maybe.
yeah, okay, orange. Yeah, it's a TFN, which is tax file number declarations. What is it, Chang?
Yeah, so as Kevin said, when you start a new job, a legitimate employer would get you to fill out this declaration form, and that's for their records and submission to the ATO as well. So this is where you formally give them your TFN. So if your employer asks you for your tax file number verbally, you know there's something dodgy there. So
just write it down in this piece of
yeah,
paper.
yeah, just read it out to them. No, don't do that. You need to fill out this actual tax file number declaration form.
Yeah.
And they basically use this form to determine how much tax they need to withhold from your pay each pay run. So essentially all the factors in the income tax withheld calculator, as we mentioned above. So when you use that tool from the ATO, it will ask you all these questions, and that will determine how much tax is withheld from each pay. So this form basically asks you the same thing, but you give it to your employer. It does look overwhelming at first, but you just need to do it step by step, question by question, and there's instructions on the first few pages too for each question. So read it carefully. I'll skim through it. I mean, I will just focus on the 3 questions that most people, I guess, struggle with or always have questions about. So there's Section A, Section B. Section A is the top part that you need to fill out. And then on the left-hand side is like straightforward personal information, like what's your name, address, and all that, date of birth. And then on the right-hand side, question 7, I think, is where it asks you what type of employment you're in, so whether that's part-time or casual. So that would be the most applicable to your case. But ask your employer if you're not sure whether you're in part-time employment or you're a casual employee.
Yeah, when we talk about part-time job, when we first came here, we always thought a part-time job is part-time, right? But then I found out a lot of them is actually called casual, because part-time is you certainly have a fixed roster and you used to have certain benefits, whereas casual means they can call you up and roster you in any day. So make sure to ask your employer exactly what type of employment they are offering you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. And then in question 8, it will ask you about your tax residency status. So this is different to your permanent residency status. So just to be aware, the rules are quite complex. But then the ATO has very kindly put together a calculator or tool to work out your tax residency status. So have a check on that link. We'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, there's some eligibility criteria to determine whether you're a tax resident of Australia or not. And this will essentially determine how much tax is withheld from your pay and at what rates.
In most cases, we are tax residents for tax purpose.
Yeah, so most cases, this is obviously, again, general advice.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, because I think one of the rules is whether you stay in Australia for more than 183 days, I think that is during the year, which most international students would, if it's in that same year, they would stay more than half the year. Yet generally, if you're a tax resident, you would pay, they would withhold less tax from your pay.
My point is just make sure you check, if you're not sure, check with your employer or even an accountant with these questions, because before I made the mistake of looking at that and say, residency, and I just take notes, straight away, and then find out that I got taxed a lot because I tick no in that box. So make sure you check and tick the right box.
Yeah. So that calculator that we'll link to from the ATO, it's quite handy because you just literally answer the questions and then it will spit out the answer for you. Yeah, and then the last question, which a lot of people get confused about, including myself at the beginning, is do you want to claim the tax-free threshold? So this will determine your tax withheld from your pay. I think on the form, it does state the description very clearly, but generally you would claim the tax-free threshold from one employer at a time only. So that means that they withhold less tax from you because they're assuming that you will be under the tax-free threshold. And generally, you shouldn't be claiming it from 2 employers at a time. However, if you're expecting that you're going to get less than 18,200 from both employers, you can still generally claim it so that they withhold less tax from you. But yeah, personal story, with my first legit employer, I didn't know what this question meant.
Yep.
So I answered, yeah, maybe I'll answer no because I don't really know what it means. So I answered no. So the result was that my pay was withheld at 47%.
Oh no.
So I had very little cash flow for the whole year until I did my tax return, and I was able to claim that tax back. So that was a valuable lesson. So just be very, very careful when you answer these questions.
I don't know why you went no with that, because when I was international students, I see anything with the word free in it, I say yes.
General rule. If it's free, say yes.
Yes, that's right. Zero rule of thumb, you know.
I love it.
Free lunch in uni, yes. That's free espresso, absolutely yes. But yeah, jokes aside, yeah, like as Chang said, this part of the story I think is make sure you check every little box carefully in that form to fully know what that means and how you can pick the right one for your situations.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it was a very tricky and a quite, I think, informative topic and lesson to talk about. And thank you a lot, Chang, for walk us through this episode. And I feel like I know a lot more about tax now than the last 10 years combined.
Oh, you're too kind, Kevin. I hope that was useful for our listeners. And I get that we did skim through a lot of the detail, but I hope this was a good basic foundation for your understanding and knowledge of what you need to do to get your tax file number, get your tax return together, and how to claim your tax back. Hopefully you get a refund.
Yeah, I'm sure this is very beneficial to our listeners. And yeah, like I said, we hope you guys like this episode, and we hope this will help you at this tax time around June and July in Australia. Thank you guys for tuning in to listen to this episode. Be very kind if you can leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Yeah, great. And if you haven't already followed us on Facebook and Instagram, please do at the Koala Club Podcast.